This is Brett with Indie Comics Dispatch and broadcasting from an undisclosed location deep within the Milky Way galaxy. This is a broadcast from the Dispatch.
If you got a story and you want the world to know it, if you think you ready and you ain't afraid to show it, throw your hands up high, yeah, we might stand out. We always representing cause that's what it's all about. We always representing cause that's what it's all about. And if you love some indie comics, let me hear you shout. Like, just stay tuned, what's the story? Had to get that every time a brand new indie comic from the Dispatch.
Good evening, everybody. Welcome to another Thursday night with broadcast from the Dispatch. Brian, how you doing?
Man, I'm good. I want to say I also love that intro, dude. I thought, like, legitimately, I was like, I'm going to get tired of it after the third time I hear it. But no, I actually really do love it, man. And it looks great, too.
I get hyped every week. David Guringer did a fantastic freaking job on the vocals for that, the whole song, and he matched it to the video we had done and timed it as he was like, so we'll match up this and do this. And I was like, I don't know what you're talking about, but I believe you. And so it turned out fantastic. Too, he is. How are you doing this week?
Man, you know what? This week I took a much needed rest, so I'm very thankful for that. So I'm doing great. If you haven't gotten vaccinated, guys, I'm definitely a pro-vax guy. Get vaccinated, protect people, do what you got to do. Public safety at this point. I got my booster today, which sucked. I won't deny. The first two, I just kind of slept through those, and this one sucked. This one really hurt, and my arm is in tremendous pain. But hey, anything for the public. Let's do it. Boom.
When my my youngest son got his flu shot recently, we were at the pharmacy doing it. Because, you know, it's easier just to take them there than make 7 different doctor's appointments for all my children. And he was just freaking out. Like, he was screaming. He kept trying to walk away and just was like, I mean, batshit, right? Just like insane. And then the nurse finally got him and he goes, oh, that wasn't bad. Hey, guys, that wasn't bad.
Nice.
That's what I imagine you doing.
You know, I was there, and so it was actually it was at the they have like a big center or whatever here. So it was kind of easy for me to get in because of where I work and what I do. And the lady actually spent more time talking to me and like prepping me for it.
Oh, wow.
Like, it's going to be a sharp pain, and you're going to. I was like, dude, I'm cool. I've already done this. Just go ahead and do it. She took like 5 minutes, like, I guess, trying to make me scared, and then she did it. And I was like, well, we done? Okay.
That's hilarious.
Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you.
Awesome. Right? Yeah, it's pretty awesome. I can't complain. How are you?
I'm good. I'm excited that this Sunday is Halloween. And then after that, or immediately after that, starts Christmas. At least.
How do you disrespect my favorite Thanksgiving like that, man? I mean, okay, I hate what the holiday stands for, but I love the food.
I mean, the food is good. I mean, we still have Thanksgiving dinner. We just have it with Christmas trees up around us. Yeah.
I'll cut you some slack then, I guess.
But I'm excited for tonight's episode because it's monsters in indie comics, and that topic was actually given to us by one of our Kickstarter backers for the You Have the Bridge night, Brian Neiford, who we'll welcome in just a second. And when I read it, I was like, man, I really hope Brian can go in October. And so he could. And so now we're here, and it worked out perfectly because he has an upcoming Kickstarter in just a little under 2 weeks now, I think, November 11th, if I'm not mistaken. His Kickstarter for Monsters Forsaken launch. But we'll talk about all that with other Brian in a minute. We'll get him on in just a second. I do want to make a couple of announcements. If you guys didn't know, I don't say this enough. This is true. I don't say it enough. Indie Comics Dispatch will publish your press release for your indie comic. We will review your indie comic if you give us time. We can't do it overnight. And both those forms on how to do that can be found on our website, indiecomicsdispatch.com. Hover over the contact us, go down to submit, and you can submit either their press release or your book for review. We do reviews. I've posted like 20 reviews this week. We have a team of over I think it's 13 reviewers who are just working on reviews, getting reviews out there. And then we gladly post press releases, write articles about your projects. And our website has over 3,000 unique users that visited a month that are captivated just looking for indie comic stuff. And so if you're not taking advantage of that, you really need to take advantage of that. So with that out of the way, let's welcome other Brian.
I want to call him Brian number one. I think it's only fair.
I think
his topic, his night. I want to call him Brian number one.
All right. Thank you, Brian number two, for allowing that. Brian Neiford first picked up a pencil and began sketching at age 4. The first chicken scratch drawing he ever did was an attempt at Batman, which his mom dated and saved and said she knew he was destined to draw from that point on. He's a lifelong fan of Batman, comic books, fiction, and classic monsters such as Frankenstein's monster, Dracula, the Wolfman, and the Gillman. About 10 years ago, he began writing the story that would be published as Monsters the Forsaken. He currently has several projects in various stages of completion, in addition to the ongoing Monsters comic book. Brian, number one, welcome.
Thank you very much. I'm happy to be here, and I'm happy that Brian number 2 spells his name the correct way as well, with an I.
You know what? That is a big, very important part of being a Brian, and I appreciate you for doing the same.
Thank you very much.
Thank you guys for being here in this Brian support club tonight. Brian Neiford, I was, like I was saying in the intro, I was so excited that you supported and that your topic was monsters in indie comics. Because last year we did a bunch of different themes for all of October. I just kind of wanted to concentrate on one main Halloween episode this year for season 2. And when I saw your topic, I was like, that's perfect. That is so good. And so I'm so glad you have that. It's such a diverse topic. But first, let's get to know you a little bit better. Tell us more about yourself. Why comics? What's your origin story as a creator?
Well, so it does go back to what you mentioned in the intro. I just started sketching when I was probably about 3.5, 4 years old. I was watching Adam West Batman reruns on TV all the time, and I loved it. And the first thing I ever drew was an Adam West Batman. And a little story about that. I told you beforehand, but I want to share it. So if you follow me on Facebook, you can see the video posted about a month ago. But I did a Batman drawing for International Batman Day for the Cincinnati Comic Expo this year. And it was kind of a cross between what I think Batman should look like and what Robert is going to look like in the next Batman movie, which I think is a pretty cool look. And I was posting updates of it, like the blue line work and the inking as I did on Facebook. And my mom saw it, and she texted me and said, "Hey, do you remember when you drew that Batman? And I saved it and then gave it to you all those years later. I wonder, do you still have that?" And I played it off like I didn't know where it was at, but I knew exactly where it was at. So as soon as the print was done, I did a matting of it with the print, with the original drawing that I had done, and a personal message to my mom and a picture that she had taken of me when I was like 12 or 13, sitting over a drafting table drawing. And I gave it to her. I videotaped giving it to her, and she broke down crying. But it was one of the coolest moments for me to see, you know, how far I've come with my art and just her reaction and what it did to her. So she was really supportive growing up. She would take me to the grocery store with her every week, and they had one of those big circular comic book racks, you know, and she would let me pick from a couple comics from there. And that's where I started reading comics, and I fell in love with them. I just love the visual storytelling style. I think it was because being an artist, I love seeing it on the page. It's actually kind of how I learned to read. And, you know, it's funny that I have met a lot of people since I started this journey of making comics that have learned to read from comic books and might not have otherwise. I think it's a very important medium that people are starting to get away from. And actually, a guy named Caleb Thusat is doing a Supercast comic for Scoop Comics, which is Scout Comics. And one of the big things with that is, and I've met him through some conventions that I think is cool, is it teaches kids to read, and it's for the younger ages, like 3 to 5. So I think that's a neat thing, and I think it's something that needs to be focused on, because I know there's a lot of problems with reading in America. So
Yeah.
especially now with the, phones and everything else and apps, and
Mhm.
kids aren't learning the way that they used to. So I think it's important. It's a good way to do that. But I started doing chores, of course, and I would get an allowance for the chores. And I found a local comic shop in Lima, Ohio, where I'm from. And my mom would take me every week and let me spend my chore money. And I was fortunate as a young teen to have been there when The Dark Knight Returns was released and pick it up in the store, and Batman Year One, and the Wolverines that Frank Miller did, and Alan Moore's
Yeah.
Watchmen. So I got to pick up those comics firsthand and bring them home and read them. And before that, it had been all bang, pow, zap, the classic Batman '66 stuff. And I saw there was a lot more you could do with a comic with those storylines. I mean, those changed the way comics were done and paved the way for Todd McFarlane and all the image creators, and everything changed in comics with Frank Miller and Alan Moore and some of those creators from back then. And that's when I realized comics could be a lot more serious. And that's what I started gravitating towards and got away from the spandex wearing superheroes, and I wanted to see those darker stories. So as about 18, 19-year-old, I started really, sending out some submissions to Marvel and DC, but that was pretty much it at that point. And I never got anything back, never heard anything. And I was just
really,
like, I guess when I find it.
Nobody ever does.
Yeah. So I went and found a real job and kind of got away from drawing. I didn't do it for a very long time. And about 10 years ago, I picked up a pencil and started drawing again. I realized how bad I missed it. And I really started enjoying myself again. And I started going back to the comic shop and picking up comics here and there, but it was hard to find anything that really interested me. I wanted something that was more than just superhero MASH stuff. I wanted something that had a darker tone to it, but yet wasn't, just somebody going out and killing the bad guys and things like that. I wanted something with a little thought to it. So I found a few things here and there that I really liked. But then about 10 years ago, about the same time, a story idea hit my head and I couldn't let it go. And that's where I'm at today. And so I just decided about 2 years ago that I needed to do it. I needed to actually put it down on paper, write it, and draw it, and go from there.
Well, let's talk about that, because I got my copies right here that you were kind enough to send, issues 1 through 4. Made it safely here.
Good.
And I was telling you before the show, I started reading, not really knowing what it was about at all. I looked at the covers, knew a little bit from your Facebook, I think, and just kind of jumped in. And man, it's a really fun story. It's a really fun story. I love it.
Happy.
I love it. It really strikes a nostalgic chord for me for some reason. I don't know. But I love it. So tell us about Monsters Forsaken, and where you got this idea.
So I'm glad it strikes a nostalgic chord, and I'm glad that you think it's fun, because that's what I want. When people walk up to me at conventions and say, "Man, I read your comic and it's fun," that makes me happy. That's the best thing that I can hear, because then I know one of the things when I'm writing the issues, if I'm sitting there and I find myself laughing or smiling, and it's not even necessarily comedy, I know I'm hitting a chord that I like, and that maybe I'm going to get that across to somebody. And I love it when people do. I love some of the reactions I get after people finish issue 1 and read that last page. And I've either got you or I don't at that point. If I don't have you with that hook, then I'm never going to get you. But if I've got you with that hook, then I've got your hook. So, and that was a fun story. That whole scene and realizing that part of the story was the big thing that made me go forward with it. It really started off completely different. I was driving down this creepy road, overgrown, bunch of closed down factories. It was Halloween time. It was overcast and dark out, and my mind was just wandering. I'm driving down this road, and for some reason, I'm looking over one of these closed down buildings, and this stupid idea of Nazi werewolves pops up in my head. And I'm like, Nazi werewolf? So I actually went home and drew a Nazi werewolf. I'm like, okay, so that's the bad guy. Who's the good guy? Like, if you're going to have Nazi werewolves, who is the good guy in this storyline? So I started thinking about it, and eventually I thought, why couldn't Dracula be a good guy? Why couldn't he be after the Nazi werewolves? And then I'm like, why would Dracula be after Nazi werewolves? You know, and that's just how the process went in my head. And eventually the Nazi werewolves were gone, and thank goodness, because it's much better without them. So, but Dracula stuck around. And when the idea for the big bad guy for the first story arc popped into my head and who he really was, then it was just right there. It was natural. There needed to be one more hero, and it had to be Frankenstein's monster. And it just grew from that point. And once I hit that part of the story, it just flowed. I drafted 12 issues and eventually fully wrote 12 issues. Wow. And I also, going forward, I'm going to introduce some of the other Universal Monster characters. You know, as you know from reading it, the storyline takes place in 1945, around World War II at the end. But over the first 12 issues, you're going to get the previous 500 years of history that explain the backstory of why Dracula and Frankenstein's monster are chasing Adolf Hitler. In that time, you're going to meet a lot of real-life historical characters like FDR, Truman, you do in the first issue. And I wanted to connect everything together and have it really have some interesting things. Like issue 5, if you know anything about the history of World War II, Buchenwald was one of the last liberated camps, and the inmates rose up against the guards before the Russian army arrived and helped free themselves. And issue 5 is called The Liberation of Buchenwald. That's going to be the next thing we get to is where we're at in that storyline. And I wanted to take real life events and combine them all together with these fantastic characters. So in the flashback scenes, there's going to be entire flashback issues. Like 2 of my favorite issues to write were issue 6, which is entirely centered around the history and how this began, how the blood feud begins, with Victor von Frankenstein, Dracula, Frankenstein's monster, Van Helsing. And then issue 8 is where I introduced the Wolfman, and that takes place around Victorian London, around the time of the Jack the Ripper murders. So I tie that in as well because I really like that whole period of time. So it does a lot of jumping back and forth, and I think I got the idea to do that from the first Highlander movie, if you've ever seen that, with the way they tell the backstory in flashback form. And I wanted to get people in without knowing exactly what they were getting into, and then go back and explain it throughout.
I love it. And that twist at the end of the episode 1 was really cool. I was like, did he just? Yep. I was looking at that panel very closely.
I'm glad.
So what has really surprised you so far about creating your own comic that you weren't expecting?
Reactions. You know, I knew that I liked it, but I was nervous. I mean, like with anything, especially for a first-time creator with no background in this. You know, I went around to a lot of local comic shops, and you know, I had printed up a editor's copy of issue 1, or issue 1 through 3. And of course, there were a lot of changes made to that, but I took it around to a lot of comic shops all over Ohio, Kentucky. And there was some, just not good reactions, or not interested in trying to get behind it. And you get that. You have, they don't know me. They don't know if I'm going to deliver. They don't know anything about me. I will say there was one of the biggest surprises I had was Peter Bell from Bell Book and Comic, which is in Dayton, Ohio. I walked in, I showed him the editor's copy. He fell in love with it and became one of my biggest supporters, has me in for signings, has been instrumental in introducing me to the people that run the Horror Hound, different big Halloween toy theme shows that they brought me in for signings, and the support. So the reaction from people that read the comic has been one of my biggest surprises, because I didn't think as many people would love it as they did. But also the reaction from the people that have been accepting and have brought me in and supported me and have been there for me. Other comic book creators that have embraced me and given me ideas and thoughts that are farther on in their career than what I am. And that level of support has been awesome. That's been my biggest surprise.
That's awesome. So I love the art style in the book. And now you do a big lift. You write and you illustrate it all. Yeah. And so I love the art style. It's black and white with pops of color. Kind of reminds me of watching an old movie, but with a little bit of
perfect.
A little bit of like, no, this isn't a movie. Here's the pop of color. What led you to that choice?
Well, before I want to talk about the big lift real quick because I want to
Yeah.
give a shout out to a guy named Benjamin Jones. He's from the USA, but he lives in Spain, and he's an aspiring screenwriter. So my buddy Jerry Kennedy, who gives me some story input here and there, he introduced me to Ben Jones, and Ben Jones is a really good guy, just a really nice guy, and was willing to throw in and help. So basically, I write the comics and I draw them, do all the illustrating, and then I send them to Ben when they're completed. Ben then reworks the dialogue and sends it back to me. And without him, the dialogue would not be as good as it is. I know what my strengths are. It's the story creation, it's the art, but dialogue was not my strength. And Ben has knocked it out of the park as far as I'm concerned. He takes exactly what I'm trying to say, makes it better. And it was funny because the first couple times he would send back drafts, he would say, I don't mean to offend you, but I think this would sound better, or something along those lines. And I'm like, man, it sounds better. Stop saying that. Just do it. I'm changing it. I'm putting in there what you put. So it is a big lift to write it and draw it, but I have had a lot of support from Ben to make the dialogue better. I couldn't have done it without his support on that. And as far as the art style, it's exactly what I wanted. It inspires nostalgia. I wanted it to look like a high definition version of an old Universal Monsters movie is the best way I can describe it.
That's exactly how it comes across.
That's awesome. I've always loved the grayscales. I always shade when I first started drawing, it was all pencil and it was almost always just shading. I never did any kind of color, any kind of inking. It was all shading. I love the gray tones to the dark blacks to the whites. It's just always been what I desired to draw. But when I decided I was doing this, I definitely wanted it to look like that high definition version of a Universal Monsters movie, and then throw in a pop of color here or a pop of color there just to catch your eye. And I don't know if you caught it or not in the first 2 issues, but you will. One of the things I did, as I wrote this a little bit differently than most comic books, is I wrote it to be played like a movie or read like a movie or a TV show. There are 0 thought bubbles. You will never see what a character is thinking throughout any of the first 12 issues. The idea behind it is I want you to see the action, hear the dialogue, or see the expressions on their face to tell the story. I didn't want to cash out and tell the story in a thought bubble, because to me, if you're going to try and make it look like a movie, you should make it look like a movie. And that's what I wanted to do. So that's been kind of hard. And that's been a big ask on my artistic end, because sometimes stuff it takes a minute to get it to where I want it to be. But I think it's pretty cool. Now, the next project I'm going to do is almost all introspection and thought bubbles. And so it'll be a little bit different. But I'm working on that, and I'm going to work on getting that out to the world after I get the first 12 issues of this done.
Very cool. Very cool.
Yeah.
So,
Brian, number one, I'm going to cut you off real quick.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. The nerd in me can't take it anymore. So I've got to ask. So you, in regards to your process, is because you have the dialogue rewritten. Well, I got a 2-part question, I guess. So because the dialogue's rewritten, do you do more of a like quote unquote Marvel style where it's kind of a broad outline and you just draw it in? Or are you like a legit script? And the second question is, when did we cross over from Creature from the Black Lagoon to calling him Gillman? Because I remember it being like Monster Squad, but I don't remember like when there was like a definitive time where we stopped. Changed.
Well, there isn't for me, and I still call him Creature from the Black Lagoon all the time. And I've had a couple creature.
I know I like this guy so much.
Enthusiasts come up to me and say, it's the Gill Man, right? At the conventions I go to, and I'm like, well, I think it's both. I think it's either or. I mean, he's always been the Creature from the Black Lagoon to me, and I can't wait to introduce him in the comic. He's going to have a brief cameo appearance in the first 12 issues, but if there's a desire for more, there is a second story arc that I've already written for the second 12 issues with a different big bad. And he's going to have a bigger storyline in this. And I've also outlined the third 12 issues, which would be the final 12 issues. This has a beginning, a middle, and an end for me, because you will learn where all these characters come from. There is a greater connected backstory between all of them. And there could be some spinoffs or et cetera for some of the creatures, because my version of the Wolfman, I think, is going to be an interesting take on him. And I think there could be things done showing what happened to him in the past as well, and could be a fun spinoff with just him. But as far as my creative process, I actually do a script. I outline it first. I write out what I want to have in there. I actually lay out the dialogue. and then I go in and do the art. And once that dialogue's done, I just trust Ben to make it better, and he always does. I after it comes back, I'm like, man, what I said really sounded stupid. This sounds so much better.
Well, what you do with Ben is editing, right? It's just it's editing, and so I always tell indie comic creators, have an editor, have somebody who looks over your work and just makes it better.
Yep.
Because everybody should have that. Everybody should have that, and not be prideful that you need it.
Oh yeah, if I didn't have it, it wouldn't sound as good. And it's like I said, I mean, everybody should do that, because you have to realize your strengths, but nobody's perfect, right? You're going to have somebody's going to be better at this than you are, this aspect of it than you are, and you should embrace it and let them help you make your dream better.
Yeah, I totally agree. So we mentioned in the intro you have a Kickstarter coming up. I think I got it right, November 11th.
You did.
Yes. I'm going to drop that link in the comments section. So if you're, and we'll put in the show notes, if you're listening to this on podcast after the fact, check the show notes for the Kickstarter link. We'll do that for all of our guests, because we do have a panel coming up right after this also. I'm dropping that link. So the preview page is live. People can go there, get notified on launch. But tell us about the Kickstarter.
So this will be a Kickstarter for issues 5 and 6. And so I've been getting approached at conventions a lot about where is 5, where is issue 5, and I'm like, it's coming. So I moved recently, so the process of selling a house, moving to a new house that I gutted and I'm completely remodeling, has been a big process, and it's pushed me back in the creative process a little bit. So I decided I was going to buckle down and get 2 issues done to release, since I'd kind of delayed issue 5 getting out to some people that want to read it. So the Kickstarter is going to have issues 5 and 6. Which is the first half of the first story arc. And along with those issues, there's going to be there'll be some variant covers in there. I'm going to do the issue 5 variant cover, and Adam Fields, who does the Prowl comic book, which is a twisted werewolf tale, he's going to do the issue 6 variant cover, and I've seen his roughs for it. It looks really cool. I can't wait to see it finished. And then I'm also going to be doing, during that Kickstarter, a graphic novel for issues 1 through 6, which is going to be a great jumping off point for people that get into it now and can't get issues 1 through 4. I still have some copies of issues 1 through 4 available, not a lot. And the first printing's almost out on all of them. But people can pick them up at my website, and there's going to be some add-ons in the Kickstarter, but I'm not going to be able to fulfill everybody that wants 1 through 4. So, and in reality, if you jump in and grab the graphic novel for $25 on the Kickstarter, it's going to be cheaper than buying the cover price for all of them. I signed the graphic novel, and I'm giving away a Monsters Unleashed print I did, a green version of it. I've done it before for the black and white, and it's been a big hit. I limited the amount of prints that I had of it and given away, and it was inspired by the Alex Ross Monsters print, where basically everybody's throwing everybody around, and Frankenstein's monster in the middle. So I took my version of the characters and did an homage to him, because I thought that's one of the coolest pieces of art that he ever did, and put my characters in there. So they're going to get that 11x17 print for free, along with the graphic novel, for jumping in and back in the Kickstarter at $25. So that's a great jumping off point to get in. There's also going to be some other limited prints I'm going to do for the Kickstarter, and there'll be some stretch goals and etc. But basically, it's to get people the first 6 issues in that graphic novel form and get issues 5 and 6 out to the collectors that want to make sure they keep getting the issues.
I love it. That's a good price on the graphic novel too, and they're
not cheap to produce. So
no, they're not.
There's not a profit margin there, but I want people to read it. That's what it's really all about. I want people to get in their hands, read it, enjoy it, or burn it if they don't love it. But hopefully they love it and want to read it again.
Don't burn it. You mentioned your website. That's brianneifordart.com. That's also in the comments section if you're out there watching. We dropped that Kickstarter link, and so people can click on that and go straight to your pre-launch page and get notified on launch. But Brian, before we get to the panel, tell us, I always like asking this question. What's one thing you've learned while creating comics that you would want to pass on to a new creator? What is one piece of actionable advice that you would give somebody who has an idea for a comic out there but hasn't pulled the trigger yet?
So the first thing I would say, it's really 2-part, is is just do it. Believe in yourself and make a plan. Put out a timeline for when you're going to either submit it to a company or launch it on Kickstarter, and then work backwards from that. That's what I ended up doing. I said, all right, on October 10th, I'm launching a Kickstarter for issue number 1. This was July. I said, I have to have this done by October 10th, which is the Kickstarter. I need to have this done by this date. I need to have this in Ben's hands by this date. I need to have this done by this date. And I stuck to the plan. And if I hadn't stuck to the plan, if I'd have gotten off the plan, it wouldn't happen. So my biggest piece of actionable advice is just pull the trigger, make a plan, work backwards from the date you're going to do it. And if you get delayed by a week, you're still a success. But do it. Get in there, make the plan, and go forward with it. And don't let anybody discourage your dreams. You're going to have people that turn their nose up at it or don't like it, but that's life. And if you have something that you believe in and you love, people are going to get behind it, and they're going to believe in it and love it. And that's the biggest thing. You have to be sold on it yourself and make that plan and do it.
I love it. Great advice. Brian, we've already mentioned where people can follow you at brianneifordart.com. We've dropped that link in the comments also for your Kickstarter. Where can they follow you on social?
My Facebook is just Brian Neiford, and they can follow me there. They can friend me there. I don't mind, and my other social is Instagram, and it's at Brian Neiford Art, just like the website. So pretty basic, I know.
Well, you're not going anywhere. You're going to be joining us for this panel in just a moment, too. So thank you. But I do want to give a shout out to you again. Thank you for backing the Kickstarter that we did and moving us towards that 501c3 status.
Congratulations on it.
Thank you. We are not approved yet. The IRS is still slowly getting to the point that we submitted our application. Everything's delayed. But thank you for helping be a part of the dispatch and making that possible.
You're welcome.
And now for the transition. Roll. I don't know if I like that music. Moving on to our broader panel with indie comics, I'm going to welcome first Lori. Lori is a comic inker, editor, and owner of critically acclaimed indie publisher Unlikely Hero Studios, who are currently kickstarting the very apropos Miss Medusa's Monstrous Menagerie. I got that out without screwing it up until November 5th. I thought for sure I was going to mess that up.
You're the first person who's gotten it right first try live, so you need to give yourself
like a lot, like an embarrassingly large amount. And joining you this evening is Mr. Matt Frank. Matt is known in Japan and America as the Kaiju King. Matt Frank is a fan favorite artist for all things giant and monstrous. His work on Godzilla, Ultraman, Transformers, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. See, I couldn't get that out though. And now Miss Medusa's Monstrous Menagerie is beyond compare. Matt, welcome.
Hi there. Thank you for having me.
No problem. So glad you can make it tonight. Love your giant lizard.
Wow.
Sorry,
Praise I never thought I'd hear.
I'm sorry. I know. Since you were the master of kaiju, I thought I would just throw that out there and just pick things up. We have with us again this week, second week in a row, Steve. Steve is a writer currently kickstarting a Gaslamp fantasy comic called Rivenport, along with artist Ryan Tavares. Steve, welcome back, sir.
Thank you.
And finally this evening, I'm going to get this right. Ajanu. I didn't get that right.
Damn.
I've heard worse.
Okay, well, thank you for pitying me. I'm so sorry.
Yeah, she got it. Ajanu.
Say it for me again, Lori.
Ajanu.
Nice.
Ajanu. Sorry, I hate that. I hate that I messed it up. Not your name. Ajanu is an up-and-coming comic book writer who has his first Kickstarter for Aslan the Awakening, which will be live until October 31st, Halloween. Welcome.
Thank you.
Guys, we are here this evening to discuss monsters in indie comics, and Brian has created a selection of wonderful panel questions. So I'm going to pass the virtual baton. Oh, wait. To Brian.
Which arm is that? Grab said virtual. Yeah. So Why is Brett such a monster and he sucks at saying names, guys? Why is that?
It's been that way my whole life.
No, so I mean, I feel like all of us have some kind of love for obviously Universal Monsters and some of those old tales. So I wanted to ask you, and I guess we'll start with Brian, number one. What makes an engaging monster tale to you?
Well, I think it's one that engages your emotions, one that will make you feel sad or scared, and one that ultimately ends up with some type of relief that you've survived it or that victorious over the monster. So I think one that really pushes a range of emotions.
Thanks. Lori?
I would say one that makes you relate to the monster in some way or another.
Matt,
I like that one. I like that
one. Short and sweet, right?
Yeah. I'm going to do my best to give a short answer because this is literally something that I scream into the ether every 2 days. I think it really depends on what kind of story you're trying to tell. You know, I think that sometimes the monster is a character. Sometimes the monster is merely an obstacle. I tend to prefer the ones where the monster is a character of some kind. But I think for me, it's whatever story you're trying to tell, so long as the story and the monster by extension is in service of that. I think that tends to be the best kind of monster story.
So kind of like what Brian said in terms of it engaging you in more than just a, I don't know, like atypical kind of manner, right?
I mean, there's something to be said for monsters for the sake of monsters. You know, sometimes that's just fun. But yeah, I mean, monsters by extension are almost universally walking metaphors of some kind. So that tends to be the stuff that grabs my attention. I'm like, ooh, this is an allegory for feminism in Japanese media circa the 1960s. Let's talk about it for 4 hours. You know, it's stuff like that. Yeah, I like monsters as metaphors.
Steve?
My answer is pretty similar. My favorite monster stories are where the monster forces an issue that the characters aren't willing to confront. And it's like the monster brings the immediacy and the danger that forces them to confront those issues. It's like when I think about it, Pennywise kind of forces people in Derry to see the types of abuses we put upon children that we kind of just like ignore or don't talk about and stuff like that.
Yeah, it kind of draws upon the monsters as metaphor angle, and I like that. I like specific examples.
Yeah.
Jonathan?
So I think it's like when the monster has like a really good origin story, and you can sympathize with that with the monster, and then when that monster also has like a protagonist that also like has a really good reason to stop the monster.
Writing 101, basically, like, hey, write a good story, and then maybe people will like your monster story.
Good stories. Yeah. Wait, do we still do those sometimes? You know,
no, sometimes.
Yeah. What about you, Brett?
Oh, I love it when the monster is relatable and we see parts of ourselves or society. Again, that metaphor, that kind of introspection of this is a monster, but wait, holy shit, we treat people exactly that way. Like I love that. I love the latest Halloween movie. That movie was, I'm just joking, that movie was freaking horrible.
Yeah,
I was like, wait, what?
I was gonna say, wasn't that movie garbage?
Don't deadpan me like that, because I was definitely like, she had an iron, Brett. Fucking iron. So I don't know. For me, I think that Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, like, well, one, I saw the Universal Monsters versions first. I watched all that. Then I went back and read the book. And, like, I remember always really sympathizing with the Frankenstein monster because, like, he was literally thrown into everything, had no, like, none of it was his fault. Like, And then there's a scene at the very end of Bride of Frankenstein, right, where she sees him, she's screaming because she's like scared of him and she hates him, and he's looking at her like, oh damn, I thought you were gonna be my girlfriend. Like, I wanted to love you, but I'm a monster and this sucks. And then he like into the lava, you know what I mean? Like into the fire. Like I always felt really, really bad for him, and I always sympathized with that. I don't know, guess what? Fish out of water, kind of not really knowing your circumstances, not really knowing what's going on, and that whole the story behind that, more than just, you know, the egomaniacal Dr. Frankenstein.
Well, I've always seen Frankenstein's monster as the victim, and in the victim in the story, more than anything else, more than any kind of monster, more than any kind of anything. He's definitely the victim. That's one reason I want to give him a chance to be a hero in my story, because he's always been a victim.
I feel like there's a great going back to the original Mary Shelley's novel. Whether or not she intended this, I think, is up for debate, but it can be easily seen as a metaphor for the cycle of abuse between Frankenstein and his monster becoming a product of his environment and becoming a product of people just being scared of him. So he sort of eventually has to be like, okay, I guess the people are going to be scared of me. I'm going to have to start snapping necks. But and then eventually he comes to Frankenstein and says, like, look, this is your responsibility. I am your responsibility. You brought me into this world, and you were like, ah! And then you ran away. And also, Dr. Frankenstein is like the worst scientist. Like, create a hypothesis and test it first, you lunatic. Anyway, sorry.
No, I agree. Dr. Frankenstein is the worst, and he's the real monster.
Yeah, what's that meme? What's that meme? It's like broke, Frankenstein is the monster. Woke, no, Frankenstein is the scientist. And then woke again is Frankenstein is the monster. Oh! So,
Yeah. I've seen that one.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, what are other monsters that Brett, that you sympathize? Damn, I could say a Janu, but I can't say fucking sympathize. Are you serious? I hate this. I hate life.
Oh, did you say me?
Yeah. Let's start with you, man.
God, honestly, okay, so I hate this movie because it scares the shit out of me. But the little girl, maybe not a monster, but still kind of fits that role in The Ring. Scary as shit. She's kind of seen as a villain. She didn't ask to be thrown down a well.
Oh, okay. Okay, fair enough. Because I was like, no, man, she's creepy as hell. She comes up to TV.
Yeah,
I was like, no, she's
hell, right?
But nah, she didn't ask for that. You're right. Fair enough. I was definitely gonna slam you for that, but you're right. What about you, Steve?
Thank you.
I'm a big Swamp Thing stan. Swamp Thing is probably my number one favorite superhero related character. Alan runs more on Swamp Thing, my favorite run of any writer on a comic ever. And Swamp Thing also fills that role of the sympathetic monster, the human who is transformed into a horrible creature by an accident, who's still struggling to maintain goodness, even though he is seen as a monster, hated by the world. In Alan Moore's run, the police in Gotham arrest Abby Arcane for having a relationship with him. I just say, if you've never read it, find the first volume of Saga Swamp Thing tomorrow.
Good stuff.
I was just gonna say, man, I hope Sarah is right. She says, wasn't she evil as a human, or was it the parents who were evil? I gotta rewatch The Wing.
I thought the parents just thought she was evil, but I thought the parents were like mentally ill. I don't know. It's been a long time, Sarah. You tell me.
I mean, it kept
Sarah, I
it
hope she
pretty
was
ambiguous, I thought.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Maybe I just interpreted it that way.
It's one of those dumbass sequels.
4 or 5.
Yeah. The Ring 17. Samara goes to therapy, or Sadako goes to therapy, whatever.
She's lying on the couch. So my mom threw me down a well.
Oh no! Yeah, so you gotta translate because mostly it's like. Oh, tell me more. Okay.
Coming out of weird CRT televisions is a coping mechanism that you.
Can't you
develop
come
as
out
you
of
start to trauma.
LCD TVs? I wonder.
What about you, John? You have any monsters you sympathize with?
I would say like vampires, like mainly Dracula. Like, have you guys seen the latest Dracula movie? How they explain like his origin story in that movie.
Is that the one with the guy from The Hobbit?
Talking about Dracula Untold.
That one. Yeah, that one.
No,
like,
I'm not
Dracula
seeing that
Untold.
one.
Yeah, and that one. So pretty much, he's like a prince that want to stop like this invading army, and then he goes and take a curse so he can save everybody. Yeah,
sounds familiar, Brian.
Mine was revenge.
Yes.
My story arc for Dracula is he's a good guy. Bad things happen to him.
Oh.
He goes out for revenge and becomes a bad guy. And then when you hit issue 4 of the comic, you find out what his quest for revenge did to everyone close to him, which is what makes him turn his back from what he has become, but he's already cursed. So the whole idea behind mine was that he becomes the monster that everyone fears, but then realizes that he is the monster and he doesn't want to be.
I love it.
Right on.
Nice. Matt?
Oh, are there monsters that I sympathize with? Let's see. I mean, I have a protracted list of monsters that I sympathize with. Again, I will attempt to whittle it down. I mean, sometimes, ironically enough, Godzilla is a character that I don't necessarily sympathize with all that much because Godzilla's existence is sort of constant pain. He was born out of cultural trauma, but he also has power that is completely unchallenged, except by other things that are as big and as bad as him. There are sympathetic moments, but I would say that a monster that I tend to find very sympathetic is King Kong.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, of course. And,
that's what I was going to say, and you stole my answer. So.
I could put Kong over here, and I could talk about Gamera instead. Because, like I said, I can wring some sympathy out of just about any monster. You know what? I'm going to go with Gamera, and I'll let Lori have Kong. So, for those who don't know, you bunch of charlatans, Gamera is a giant turtle from Japanese monster movies. Started off mostly a children's character in the 60s and 70s. Got brought back in the 90s as something a little more focused and a little more mature. And as a result, they found a way, because the idea of Gamera, again, he's a monster, very destructive, but trying to protect people, trying to protect the world from outside threats. One of the things that I liked that they kind of started exploring was the idea of you're a monster, as almost by default, you're not going to be trustworthy. Even if you're trying to do right, even in the case of Gamera, you were literally born to protect humanity, but humanity's not going to trust you regardless of how hard you try, because you're still a monster. You're still this thing that should not exist. So there is something so inherently tragic about being a persistent, constant sacrifice, being a living sacrifice for everyone who is just a bunch of ingrates anyway. So, and that's something
sounds like me and my kids.
Yeah, I think it's a good comparison. It's like being a parent. Yeah, so that's one I would go with.
Your show, Lori.
Yeah, who are you gonna pick, Lori? Surprise us.
Well,
Surprise us.
yeah, because I thought about Frankenstein, and then I was like, okay, well, I have to pivot off of Frankenstein, I guess. And okay, King Kong seems good, and you guys are all really good for me. But yeah, I think King Kong's kind of an obvious one. It also kind of depends on his portrayal, I guess. Sometimes he's portrayed as just like a horrible monster, and in other movies he's kind of portrayed as kind of lovable, and he kind of has a sense of humor, and he wants to save people, so it kind of depends. But I think he has that kind of, Frankenstein feel where he's terrifying and everyone's scared of him, but he's having a bad day,
It's very
What are your
lonely
thoughts
character.
on Medusa, Lori?
Oh
Yeah.
yes, we Yeah, it's
I
Medusa,
was thinking that
a
too.
sympathetic creature, monster.
I feel like we threw
Is
you
she-
a lob and you
is
totally
she
missed
though?
out.
Yeah. In I guess in retrospect I should have said her instead.
Don't
No,
let
I
Brian
should've.
number 2 bully you,
For
Lori.
you,
Don't let
Fred,
Brian number
yeah.
2 bully.
Yeah.
That's not bullying. That's editing. Excuse me. We had a whole segment on it.
Yeah, no, I would argue, yeah, she is sympathetic. People are fucking bothering her, and she's getting a bad rep. Men are bugging her, so she's turning them to stone, right? She has a bad rep for this.
Getting just because I established boundaries and being called a monster.
Right.
Yeah.
All right, Brian, number 1. What you got, man?
I'm gonna say Jason Voorhees. I know that's kind of an out there one for being sympathetic, but you're talking about a kid that drowned that already had mental issues, and then when he comes out of the water, he watches his, depending on your iteration of it, he watches his mom get beheaded, and then he's living out alone in this camp by himself with, surviving for 20 years, and people just won't stay out of his property. Like, just leave him alone. He's
Get off my
out
ground.
in the
Get
woods.
off my
Stay away from him. Don't go there. It's abandoned and run down. Bad things are going to happen. You're going to get your head chopped off, or a machete, or by an axe. Just leave Jason alone, and he's not bothering you.
There's a suit I saw it today. I just, as a quick interjection, there's a super adorable little web comic that this artist started making about like an alternate universe. What if Jason just became a camp counselor? So he's this giant, like, silent camp counselor who just kind of like, he rescues kids from drowning, and he's all super cut, so all the counselors are like, oh, he's kind of hot. But his mom is still kind of a crazy person. So he's like grabbing people by the head, but then just making them duck so that his mom's arrow just flies by their head. He's just like, it's just mom. So it's so cute. And then he goes on a date with Carrie. It's super cute.
I love it. Another sympathetic character.
Right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
It was definitely not her fault at all.
No. Falls in the same camp as Medusa.
Right? Seriously.
Yeah.
Yeah, but then they're the bad guys. I don't get it. So I am one of the few lovers of one, everybody loves Monster Squad, and if you don't love Monster Squad,
Love Monster
I don't
Squad.
know what you're talking about. But I'm one of the few people that love Steve Summers' Van Helsing. Right? It's kind of campy, it's kind of cheap, but I think I like the interpretations of some of the characters. So we saw the Dark Universe kind of implode off of that Mummy flick a few years ago. So do you guys think that kind of diminishes the appeal of the Universal monsters and that type of storytelling? Or
Can I run?
yeah, run.
Go ahead,
All
man.
right, so I think no, I don't think it does. I think what they need is a big course correction. They need the right version of these characters. It can't be the same old thing over again, but it also can't just be just a gender change. They then brought in Tom Cruise to be the new Mummy going forward at the end of that movie to be the hero, and Tom Cruise isn't the Mummy. He's MI5, they could have done so much better with that. The Mummy could have, the mummies that Brendan Fraser were in were cool. It was had the Raiders of the Lost Ark feel, but some horror elements to it. And that's what they should have gone with, something along those lines. If they wanted some type of hero coming in there. I'm one of the few, I don't know about the panel here, but I love the Benicio del Toro Wolfman movies. I thought
it's fun.
cool.
Great,
They had awesome special effects. He was a sympathetic character as well. That Wolfman's always been a sympathetic character. But I think they need a course correction. I have seen a tremendous amount of support and interest in the Universal monsters over the last year with my comic book going forward. And people just want a fresh take, but they don't want it to be a dumb fresh take. And, they need to stop worrying about what big actor they can get in the role going forward for these characters and get a good actor and a good director. And I'm very curious about this new Wolfman that's coming out, that it's got a new idea pitched in the current timeline. They're bringing in a director that hasn't done horror movies before, like Jason Blum does, and he does some pretty decent stuff for the most part. So you get the right creative team, I think you can get people to it. They've tried a couple times. Dracula Untold didn't make it. The Wolfman didn't make it. But I think they're just missing the mark, just barely. And I think they can. I think they can still be characters that people are interested in, but they've got to have a fresh take.
I mean, that's basically as you're describing, I think, is the Shape of Water approach, because I friggin' love the Shape of Water. Yeah. And apparently that movie was born out of Guillermo del Toro's desire to make a Creature in the Black Lagoon movie, but his whole based on what I heard, they originally Universal approached Del Toro to make the Creature in the Black Lagoon Dark Universe film, but he said, but I want the creature to be sort of more of a protagonistic character, like more misunderstood. And they're like, no, he's a bad guy, no. So then he's like, okay, I'll go make my own Black Lagoon movie, and there's going to be fish doinking in it. So, and I'm going to get all the Oscars. So, there you go.
I feel like we peaked at fish doinking. Like, I feel like we reached that level. Like, wow, fish doinking. Okay.
You're welcome.
How do we think artists, or I shouldn't say artists, but writers, I guess, a little bit of both, figures like Clive Barker and like Stephen King have changed the horror genre and the monster genre? Because I'm still freaked out by the 90s It. Like, I won't watch that one.
Right?
The new one, I will, right? Like, it's cool. But the old one, Tim Curry, Pennywise the Clown, never doing it by myself in life. So how do we think people like that affected the monster genre? How did they change it? John, let's start with you, man.
So I think Stephen King, like, his stories were really good. I think he forced you to look within for the monsters and not like without. And till this day, like you, I don't like clowns. I won't go near a clown. I don't like red balloons. If I see one, I'm leaving the party. It's over. Like,
Right.
Yep.
Steve?
That's freezing.
Pennywise, obviously, like an iconic monster, really started the whole creepy clown thing, if you think about it. But, like, it's also an archetype that matches, like, the, like, Lovecraftian elder horror, a being that doesn't have a real form. Being that, like, they do end up killing it, but, like, it, it's something where it can affect your mind in ways that you can't understand. And Clive Barker, Hellraiser is like, and the Cenobite designs, that's like something everybody thinks of when they think of demons, and just everything that spawned off of the Hellraiser movies becoming as popular as they are. Would, Spawn be a thing if Hellraiser didn't exist? I don't think it would. I mean, you could argue, but
Good point.
Yeah.
I watched Hellraiser way too young. Like,
Me too.
Product of the 80s. Like, why were we watching this? Like, I was not prepared.
My uncle was like, "Hey, want to see a movie? 5-year-old or however old I was." It's like,
It scared me a lot more because the lament configuration, you could just be like, "Nope, not messing with that. Just take that in the other room. I don't want to see it." Like,
What about you, Matt?
I think it is interesting to consider whenever you have a new voice in the genre, in the monster or by extension horror genre, coming in and bringing in a fresh perspective. King, he's really good at, not just finding psychological angles, but again, kind of tapping into that unknowable Lovecraftian, and of course Lovecraft by extension, if we're going way back, but this idea of of something unknowable, and that's what makes it scary. Like, as far as completely unsympathetic monsters go, you get stuff like the Lovecraftian mythos that plays off the idea of being completely unsympathetic, and that's what makes them scary, because they don't care about, we're just not even a blip on their radar. And I think King is really good at tapping into that, and by extension Barker, these ideas of because I think that, you know, it's sort of an old hat at this point that the more you know about something, the less scary it becomes. That was a problem that the Resident Evil games had for a while, was that, like, okay, we got it, it's Umbrella, yep, zombies, okay, let's keep this moving. And you know, and then it was only when they stripped everything back down and really focused it in I wanted to say it was 7.
Yeah, I think you're right.
Yeah, was when it started becoming scary again, because again, you were in a situation where you had no power, no control. You're just trying to survive. So I think that itself, I think, is a fascinating subject of inherent powerlessness. And I think, again, King is really good at creating that sense of dread.
Damn, that was really good. Also, I hated that the Resident Evil games became more like action than like suspense horror, and I think that was part of the problem. Like, you had limited ammo.
I think 8 finds a really good balance. And what's interesting about 8 is that 8 also has a lot of those universal monster influences. Lady D, she's a vampire that lives in a gothic castle. The Lycans, the werewolf people in the village, and even like, what was the other thing? Just like
the clockwork people or whatever they were.
Yeah, and the fact that Heisenberg, the leader of these like machine men, is also a monster who wants to destroy his creator. Spoilers for RE8. Sorry about that. You know?
Yeah.
Well, what do you think, Brian?
One of the cool things that I think Clive Barker did was, I don't really see the Cenobites as bad. They just did what they did. And he kind of turned the monsters not into the bad guys with that. They did what they did. People made choices. And it was kind of the same thing with Nightbreed, which wasn't a real popular movie, but all the monsters that were scary looking were not bad. They were all, you know, just normal people normal monsters trying to live a life, and the real monster, and that was Dr. Decker going around killing them, you know. And I think that was kind of a cool twist that he did to some of the things that he influenced. And I could echo everything everybody says about Stephen King, but it is what it is. I mean, he was able to tap into the psychological horror of you not knowing what was really happening around you, and reflecting to the inside of you, and exposing the monsters that we all are. And, you know, I mean, he's just Stephen King.
Lori?
I was actually going to say, this kind of ties in, I think, to the last question about fresh takes on Universal monsters. I think some of the reason why King is so successful is because he does that. It's subtle, like it's not like, you know, he doesn't say it, but he's doing Universal monster stories in some of his stories, and he's doing a fresh take on it. He's doing something different, and he's scaring the shit out of us, and it's awesome. And same with Clive Barker. Like they both did original stuff, but they also did fresh takes on stuff that was familiar to us, and they made it scarier. And I think we need to see more of that.
Yeah. Barker as metaphor, I think, is a really good point as well. You know, the Clive Barker's work, especially when it comes to Nightbreed, because I think it's pretty clear what Nightbreed is kind of supposed to be about. Yeah. It's about basically being gay and feeling like you can't be who you want to be. And I didn't even know about Nightbreed until like 2-3 years ago, and I was like, oh my god, this sounds amazing. Why have I not seen this? And you watch it, you're like, oh, it's a little bit of a mess, but that's okay. It's got really good ideas and some really cool monsters. So, you know, good effort, Clive.
Brett, what do you think?
You know, so here's my thing, right? I think that I don't know enough about who wrote what to have an answer. It all meshes together in my mind. It's all just kind of like one era of horror, but I think that them as a collective so influenced a certain era of horror, and then we kind of had the pushback of it in the early 2000s, where horror went just a completely different direction for a while. And I see us kind of coming back to that kind of authentic horror, I call it, because that's what I grew up with. But kind of swinging back towards that with films, and definitely in comic books. I think heading back that way.
With regard to, like, for me personally, with regard to like Clive Barker, when we're talking about Hellraiser, like Steve was like, "Oh yeah, you can just put it to the side." But I remember, again, like being an '80s kid, like Rubik's cubes were like super popular. So like I feel like you couldn't put it to the side, and I thought that, again, at least with regards to like Hellraiser and Salem's Lot, Dark Half, and some of those things that came out, some of those works that came out at that point, like it really was taking like the mundane. I grew up in a port town, right? So like it's a reflection of Derry. So yeah, we had the little creepy church guy that just moved in. Yeah, we had the old dusty bookstore. And you're like, is that the devil now? Like, and so it was taking like these really mundane experience that we all kind of have in one fashion or another, and making them creepy as fuck, which I thought was dope, because then it really was hard to close your eyes at night, because you were always having those doubts of, at least with that childlike imagination of what was going on. So I love that about both of them, that they could take something very subtle and make it into like an internal think piece that also scared you.
Yeah, well, maybe I'm just a coward, but somebody was just like, hey, if you solve this cube, it's going to show you these crazy ass extra dimensional beings who can show you horrors and pleasures beyond your imagining. I'd just be like, no, I'm good. I'm good on that.
I don't know. I'm sure somebody be into that.
Right?
Yeah, but
a lot of people out there just went, wow, that horrors and pleasures? Okay.
Yeah, right? Like, having pleasures. I was like, pleasures?
Would have got me.
That is something I wish would have, from the first Hellraiser movie, that I wish would have stuck around in the other ones, is that the Cenobites were originally, they're not good or evil. People seek them out, and then they're just like, if you want me to show you like the pleasures that the universe has to offer, I have to show you the horror the universe has to offer too. Yeah,
you summoned us, we came.
Yeah. Exactly. You summoned us, we came. Like,
yeah. I mean, they're almost like angels in a way, and I mean, like Old Testament angels, of course, were supposed to be incomprehensible nightmares, but they were also representational of something, of some greater, a higher purpose that was also kind of incomprehensible. Again, that sort of Lovecraftian take, except this time you get hooks in your nipples, and that's just how
just
it
like
plays out.
Jason.
Make sure to just
hooks in his nipples.
Fire off a Jesus wept right before they rip you apart.
Oh man.
All right, so two big questions, and these are rapid fire, I guess. Jason or Michael Myers? Brian, you're first.
There it is.
He came
Very
prepared.
Nice.
William Shatner's pissed off right now.
Right. I just read that article that he didn't know for all these years.
No, how did he not know? He came back from space enlightened.
Right. Lori?
Jason.
1-1. Matt?
Jason.
2. Steve?
Jason.
Oh, it looks like you're losing this one, Brian. John?
Yeah, Jason.
Brett?
He's been to space.
Sorry,
he's
Brian.
been to New York.
Jason.
So Jason here's my argument. He just wants to people to stay away from him, and then he's chopping them up when they don't. Michael's a force of nature, and he's terror, and he's out looking to stab people and kill them in ways that entertain him. And I think to him, it's almost like an art form. And I know the new movie is very divisive. There were some scenes in that new movie, though, that really showed a little bit of Michael's thought process. And the big one is when he drags the guy over and puts him over the counter, and while the wife is still alive watching, and he stabs the guy in the back. And then a spoiler alert here for everybody. And then he sits back and looks at the knife in it to admire it, and then does it again. And then looks at it and then does it again. He's terrifying. He wants to see what he can do to you. Jason just wants to chop your head off.
That's why I don't like him.
Yeah.
Well, see, but doesn't he do that? Isn't he just like the world's meanest latchkey kid? Because all he's trying to do is get back home.
Yeah.
He's like, I just want to get back home.
Yeah.
I had stabbed you on the way here. Like,
but let's be clear. Let's be honest about something. As much, even though we all are, most of us are a little more sympathetic towards Jason. Halloween is the better film.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. John Carpenter. Yeah.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Yeah. I feel like you can't beat that.
Yeah, and I love the new timeline because Carpenter never intended for Laurie to be the sister. You know, that was not in the first movie. It wasn't something he wanted to write. And had they not had the financial backing and the explosiveness and how well the first one did, it would have never happened because other writers wouldn't have been able to come in and push him around or ideas with producers. So when you go back and watch the first movie and she's not his sister, to me, it's way scarier than thinking he's his sister, because these are just random kids he saw out walking around inside. I'm just going to terrorize and stab these people and kill them, you know. And then the new timeline flowing off of that, there were some bad things in it, but there were some good things. Laurie realizes that he's not after her. He's just there. You know, he's not chasing her down, you know. And I knew going into this one, it was going to set up the third one. So I didn't expect a lot out of it. So I enjoyed it. I think people that didn't know it was setting up a third one, especially people I've talked to, then they didn't like it because they're like, oh, well, he just got up and walked away, right? But they're setting
Nobody likes the middle child.
Yep.
Can
That hurts so much. All right, I think we're getting pretty close to the end, but I definitely want to cover. This one is really important to me. I mean, I love it and I love the question, and we've already kind of covered some of it though. But monsters, American versus Asian, and so I know Matt is going to have an entire
I have a
thesis on this, right? So what are the pros and cons of both? Because I mean, we've seen this. Well, not now, but you know, in the early 2000s or 2010, where you had all the Japanese, you know, import movies, and they tried to retell The Ring and that stuff, and a couple of those other ones.
Grudge.
Right. I'm a big fan of Train to Busan, and they're doing a Train to Busan remake, and I wish they wouldn't do an American version of it. So pros and cons. Why don't we save Matt for the end, because he's gonna drop the things. Why don't we start with you, Brett?
So the Japanese horror movies was kind of what I was referring to earlier, kind of like the pushback that we saw from the more traditional American horror. They scared the shit out of me. So they scare me hands down way more than the American-based horror films. American is kind of like that jump fright. You know, as a kid, they freaked me out. But as an adult, I'm just like, oh yeah, gore, okay. The Japanese horror scares me to death.
Because you can never fucking win. I hate that. Even when they beat the thing,
just can't.
You still didn't win. Like, drives me crazy. What about you, Brian?
So when I saw this question, I kind of looked at it from a past timeline. You know, with Asian cinema producing the original Godzilla movies and American cinema producing the original Universal Monsters movies. And for me, they're all pros, because had we not had those movies back then, the original classic Universal Monsters, the kaiju movies, Godzilla, where we've got to now, where they're still remaking the stuff, we wouldn't be having this discussion. We wouldn't have had Michael Myers. We wouldn't have had Jason. We wouldn't have all the monsters that Stephen King created. Way back when they made those movies, it was all pros for me, you know, and that's kind of the way I look at it. They're the granddaddies of us having new monsters to be scared of every day.
I agree. That's a good take.
Thank you.
Laurie?
I'm trying to keep it short here. I tend to prefer and be more scared by Japanese horror films. I also find that the cinematography is generally something I prefer. I prefer wide shots and long shots, and American cinema, especially now, tends to be just like 100 million really
Yeah.
quick cuts, and you don't even really see what's happening, and things are
Yeah.
flying at your face, and you're just like, I don't know. I might be motion sick. I might be scared. I'm not sure. So I have a bias towards Japanese monster movies and horror in general.
Can we all agree that Hong Kong cinema and cinematography just is shot better? You know, I mean, I feel like
exactly,
everybody gets it. I don't know why America still does the quick cut. It hasn't really worked since like the Bourne movies, and that's even a different version of the quick cut that's actually done correctly. But don't get me started. Jonathan?
So I personally think like American stories are scarier, but the Asian ones have better backstories to them.
That's true.
Yeah.
I can totally see that.
Yeah, we were just talking about what the ring, and she gets thrown down a well, and is she evil? Is she not? Like, we don't even remember. And I feel like we've all seen it a bunch of times, probably. Steve?
Well, one of my favorite things about both American and talking about Japanese horror is that there's just a broad variety of it, both in America and in Japan. I think generally, if we're talking about films like The Ring, they're much better at building dread and building like
That's a great
suspense
word.
and stuff like that. But there's also stuff from Japan like Tokyo Gore Police, just stuff that's total trauma-inspired splatterhouse craziness. And, you know, it's the same thing in America. We have American, like, Hereditary is very similar to The Ring in a lot of ways. And then, so I find there's a lot of good back and forth and exchange. Like, one era, one will influence the other more, but for the most part, there's something for everybody to like on both sides.
Matt, you ready?
The man, or like the man of the hour, are we?
Oh, is it my turn? Like I said, I'll try not to talk everyone's ear off, but I mean, fundamentally, what one of the things that I just popped into my head was the idea of the familiar versus the unfamiliar, and one of the reasons why Japanese and by extension Asian horror might be a little more appealing is because we're not all as familiar with the nuances of that culture. You know, there are aspects of Japanese horror, by extension Japanese culture, that are just in some ways incomprehensible to us. So that's why something like The Ring resonated so much when it came out, because everything about it was stuff that a lot of Americans had never seen before. And but the whole long black hair thing, that is a recurring trope in a lot of Japanese horror going way back.
Like there's woodcuts with stuff like that in it, right?
Mm-hmm. I mean, there's a character in Miss Medusa's Monstrous Menagerie who she's a woman Japanese woman who has a mouth in the back of her head, and that's all part of this whole yokai inspired story. So, and you know, so there are those little subtle cultural differences that make things sometimes pop out to us and make it a little more like, ooh, you know, that's weird. I don't know what's going on here. And by extension, that makes it scarier. So that's part 1 of 47. Now I can get to 30 if we do it at least half an hour. No, just kidding. I can end it there. That's the major point I wanted to make.
So I want to say real quick, Lori, I've supported every one of your books and every one of your campaigns that's ever come out that I've known about. I'm going to continue to support it. But between the Medusa makeup you wore and the lady with the mouth in the back of her head, I'm already creeped out, so I won't be reading it. But I'm going to buy it. I'm going to put it away somewhere. All right? You guys have already, you've reached my limit of creepiness.
That's
so
enough.
I'm going to just go ahead. Yeah, I'm going to support it. But don't ask me anything that's in the content of it.
Well,
just like get it graded and put it on the shelf.
there you go. Well, I mean,
Well, that's
they do. We try to make these nightmares against God relatable because it's a workplace. It's a workplace comedy drama.
well, that's a great segue to say let's go around and tell us about your projects. Let's go ahead and start with Matt and Lori. Which one of you two wants to give the pitch?
Is that on me? All right.
Yeah,
I'm gonna make
apparently.
Thank you. So the short version is hold on a second. Okay. The short version is that Ms. Medusa's Monsters Menagerie. It's about a circus carnival thing in America in the 1960s, and it is a circus owned and operated by monsters, or mythics as they prefer to be called. A lot of the mythological characters, demigods and monsters and whatnot. They've all more or less been brought together by Miss Medusa as her stage name. Her legal name is Gina Tatopoulos. And she's a Gorgon, of course, and she's just, trying to keep this whole thing from falling apart every 20 to 25 minutes. And you get to deal with lots of other, mythological, folklorish characters. There are fae, there are centaurs, there are griffins, there are giant fire snakes from the Amazon. And it's just about these characters all having to live and work together in 1960s America, which is already kind of a sketchy place to be. If if you don't fit in the mold that America thinks you should fit into. So I know, right? It's weird. So yeah, so we have fun with it. It's illustrated by myself and our writer Paul Hanley. And Paul, as I said, did all the writing, and he did a lot of the illustration too. And it's been 4 years of this, and it's finally coming out.
Sarah,
yeah,
adding
what
her
Sarah
comment.
said. Yep.
Janu, tell us about Aslan the Awakening. Did I get that right?
Oh
Right?
yeah.
Okay.
So Aslan the Awakening. Yeah. So Aslan is it takes place in this world known as Margot, right? And in that world, there's this being known as the Ujda, and his time is coming to an end. And he has this crown of power, and he's pretty much looking for somebody else to take charge of the land, right? But he doesn't really trust everybody else, so he makes a trial, and pretty much you have to pass a series of tests and prove that you're worthy of the crown. And so the humans are trying to get to it because they think if the monsters get it, the monsters are gonna kill everybody. And the monsters are trying to get the crown because they think the humans are the real monsters, and if they get it, they're gonna, destroy the trees and everything that's holy to them. So the story is pretty much about this half breed that's trying to pretty much keep peace between everybody and get the crown.
I love it. I love it.
Yeah.
That sounds really cool.
Dig it.
Definitely back day one. I can't wait, man. I'm honestly looking forward to that one too.
Steve, you told us last week, but tell us again. Tell us about Rivenport.
Rivenport's a gas lamp fantasy comic. It's essentially a D&D fantasy world of elves, orcs, and dragons that's reached its own version of the Industrial Revolution. But because of that, it's also developed its own version of organized crime. And not to get too spoilery, but there are elements of gothic horror stories like Frankenstein and Dracula that work their way into the comic as well. It's still on Kickstarter till November 15th, and there's still $3 digital, $8 shipped right to you copies available.
That's awesome.
Excellent.
That's awesome. Everybody, thank you so much for being here tonight. Don't forget Brian Neiford's Kickstarter drops November 11th. Monsters Forsaken issues 5 and 6 and the graphic novel $25. Everybody's links have been dropped in the comments sections of the various platforms except for you, Instagram, because you don't have clickable links. But Facebook, YouTube, links are there. You can click them. Go support the projects or get notified when they launch. It's been a fun evening. Good lead up to Halloween, talking about monsters. I'm gonna go watch some scary movies now, I think. Brian, Steve, Matt, Lori, Ajanu, thank you guys so much for being here this evening. Brian number 2, thank you so much for co-hosting with me. We are back next Thursday. And hold on, I should have had this already pulled up. I'm a horrible host. Next Thursday, we're talking about Monochrome World with Cody Zine. It's Cody is a filmmaker and is going into comic books, and so we're talking about his series Monochrome World next week, Thursday night, 8:30 p.m. This episode will be available next Thursday evening as a podcast, and everybody's links, if they're still going, will be included in there also. Everybody, thank you so much once again for being here. Everybody out there watching, we'll see you next week.
Have a great night.
Thank you.